Since you couldn't provide us with an heir, here, take this anniversary gift. My father-in-law declared smugly. The velvet box in his hand looked deceptively elegant, as though it contained a necklace or perhaps earrings chosen for sentiment. When I opened it, the truth struck me like ice water to the chest. Inside lay divorce papers, the edges crisp, my name printed in harsh black ink across the top. The room seemed to tilt as I lifted my gaze toward my husband. Before I continue narrating the story of Catherine, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Timothy avoided my eyes, his expression tight as though his own shame might crack the surface if he met my stare. He adjusted his cufflinks instead, feigning interest in anything but me. Then Sharon, my mother-in-law, stood from her chair with theatrical delight. "We'd also like to introduce you to someone very special," she announced, her hand gesturing toward the doorway. A young woman, no more than 25, stepped forward with a confident smile. "This is Judith," Sharon continued, her voice gleaming with triumph. "She will soon be Timothy's wife." I sat frozen in my seat, the documents still heavy in my lap. A legal ending of my marriage had been presented like a stage performance, complete with the unveiling of my replacement. Around me, the clinking of silverware and the rustle of fine china turned surreal, like props in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The humiliation was designed to pierce me in front of everyone we knew. Family friends, distant relatives, even neighbors sat in stunned silence as the display unfolded. My carefully arranged flowers and polished crystal now seemed like accomplices to my betrayal. My hands trembled as I signed the page, my name bleeding ink into a contract I hadn't agreed to in my heart. In the corner of my eye, I saw Judith beam, as if she had won a prize. But then, before Sharon could sit again, another sound sliced through the air. "Since we're handing out surprises," my best friend Erica said, rising from her seat with measured calm, "I brought one too." She pulled an envelope from her purse, her fingers steady where mine had faltered. She placed it before Mason, my father-in-law, and folded her arms. "Why don't you read this before you celebrate too soon?" The color drained from Mason's face as his eyes skimmed the page. Whatever superiority had lined his voice only moments earlier dissolved into silence. Sharon leaned forward sharply, demanding, "What is it?" Mason's lips quivered as he struggled to form words. Finally, his voice emerged, hollow and cracked. "It's a pregnancy test. Catherine is pregnant." Gasps rippled through the dining room as my body became the stage once more. Every calculating smirk turned into frozen disbelief. Timothy's eyes snapped to mine, suddenly desperate, suddenly awake with the realization of what he had thrown away. Judith's confident smile faltered, her hand dropping from Timothy's arm as though it burned her. The weight of their betrayal shifted instantly into the weight of their mistake. I remembered how that day had started, so full of promise. The morning light had filtered through lace curtains, casting a soft glow on our wedding photo framed above the mantel. I had woken early, heart racing with the joy of celebrating 2 years of marriage. My hands had carefully prepared Timothy's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with crisp turkey bacon and a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. I had expected warmth, gratitude, maybe even a kiss, but instead he had given me silence. "Happy anniversary," I whispered that morning, sliding the plate before him. He glanced at me over the rim of his newspaper, muttering, "Yes, 2 years," as though reading a headline. The words landed like stones, heavy and dismissive. I told myself he was distracted, that men often fumbled through anniversaries without the anticipation women carried. I swallowed my unease, convincing myself the evening celebration would bring the affection the morning lacked. I had spent the afternoon at Mason and Sharon's house, polishing the silver, arranging roses, and ensuring every detail was flawless. Sharon's energy buzzed in a way I couldn't name then, but recognized now as anticipation. "Tonight will be special," she told me, her eyes alight with secrets. Mason nodded, his approval sharp and smug. 2 years is long enough for evaluation," he added, as though my marriage were a contract under review. Even then, I thought they meant acceptance at last. I had endured 2 years of sharp comments disguised as concern, of silent dinners where my womb became the subject without words. Each holiday, each gathering, had been a test I believed I could pass if I only tried harder. That evening, when the crystal glasses caught the chandelier's glow, I felt certain my efforts had succeeded. Yet beneath the laughter of our guests, an undertone whispered warnings I didn't want to hear. My Aunt Patricia had clasped my hands during cocktails, her eyes searching mine. "Catherine, dear, you look pale," she said gently. "If you ever need anything at all, you call me." Her words rattled me then, though I didn't yet grasp why. Now, replaying the moment, I realized she must have known. Through dinner, Timothy kept his distance, never brushing my hand, never catching my eye. He drank more than usual, refilling his glass before it was empty. His laugh sounded hollow, too loud, as though covering a silence he couldn't face. When someone asked about our plans for the future, his answer was vague, his eyes darting toward his father as if for approval. I sat beside him, feeling more like a stranger than a wife. The courses blurred together: soup, roast, salad, wine. I could barely taste a bite, though I smiled, though I nodded, though I performed my role with practiced grace. Each glance around the table revealed whispers shared behind raised hands, expressions that shifted when I looked. I convinced myself it was nerves, that my family saw more in me than I could. But the truth was far darker. When dessert was set before us, Sharon rose, her voice bubbling with excitement. "We have a wonderful surprise for you, Catherine," she said. The words wrapped around me like vines, binding me in place. Mason's chair scraped back as he stood, his presence commanding every corner of the room, and then he revealed the gift, the cruelest gift of all. Mason's hand extended the envelope as though bestowing honor, not ruin. My breath caught as my fingers brushed the paper, its weight somehow heavier than it should have been. I opened it slowly, unwilling to accept the truth until I saw it in black and white. Petition for dissolution of marriage, it read, cold and precise. I could feel the eyes of every guest fixed on me, their silence louder than any reaction. The room spun in slow motion, faces blurring into a wall of voyeuristic pity. I turned to Timothy, hoping for a shake of the head, a denial, any sign that this wasn't real. But he stared straight ahead, jaw tight, refusing to look at the wife he was discarding. "You already signed," I said, the words choking in my throat. His only response was a small nod, as if acknowledging a completed task. Then Judith stepped forward, her heels tapping against the hardwood like punctuation marks on my grief. "I'm so honored to finally meet you properly," she said, her smile too smooth, too rehearsed. My gaze dropped to her earrings, delicate pearls that had once belonged to Timothy's grandmother, promised to me after our engagement. Now they hung from the ears of the woman replacing me, a cruel exclamation point to this charade. My hand tightened on the pen Mason offered, but my resolve was already unraveling. The words around me blurred, Sharon's gleeful commentary, Mason's smug affirmations, Timothy's silence. I could feel the pressure mounting, the expectation that I would accept my scripted role. I looked at the line, waiting for my signature, a neat yellow tab guiding me like a traffic sign toward heartbreak. My fingers moved of their own accord, scratching my name onto the page as if in a trance. The crowd exhaled in collective relief, their tension releasing with the sound of pen on paper. But before Sharon could raise her glass to toast this mockery of closure, Erica's voice rang out. "Don't sign anything else," she commanded, already moving forward with her own envelope. Her calm was like thunder waiting to strike, and every head turned toward her. "You forgot something important," she said, placing the sealed document in front of Mason, "something that changes everything about tonight." I watched as Mason hesitated, his fingers twitching over the flap. He opened it without flourish, expecting perhaps a petty interruption. But as he read the contents, the blood drained from his face like water swirling down a drain. "Catherine is pregnant," he said, his voice breaking as the words betrayed his control. Sharon gasped audibly, clutching her necklace like a lifeline. Timothy's chair screeched against the floor as he stood, finally shaken from his stupor. "What?" he whispered, his eyes searching mine for confirmation he no longer deserved. I didn't speak. I simply looked at him, letting my silence echo louder than his disbelief. Judith's hands dropped from his arm like they no longer belonged there. Every piece of the evening's performance cracked under the weight of truth. "It's confirmed," Erica said, stepping beside me now, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Blood test, 48 hours ago. Dr. Patterson's office." Her voice was clear, deliberate, anchored in the truth they tried to erase. Mason opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The room that had been so eager to celebrate my failure now stared, stunned and rudderless. Every smirk from earlier had faded, replaced by slack-jawed shock. The silence held like a storm cloud too heavy to float, threatening to burst with consequence. I finally spoke, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Congratulations," I said, staring directly at Mason. "You just gave away your grandchild." A gasp rippled across the guests, sharp and immediate. Judith took a shaky step backward, her composure fracturing. Sharon looked from the paper to me, mouth agape. Timothy took a half-step forward, unsure, unsteady, his earlier confidence scattered like ash. "We didn't know," he said, barely audible. Erica's hand remained firm on my shoulder, grounding me. "And that's the point," she said quietly. "You never bothered to ask. You assumed. You judged." Mason sat down heavily, the divorce papers still on the table before him. His hands shook as they hovered above the pages that now looked more like mistakes than victories. Timothy tried again. "Catherine, we can fix this." His voice sounded more like a question than a promise. "We can tear them up. Forget this happened." I turned toward him then, taking in every inch of the man I had once trusted. He looked smaller than I remembered, as though the lies had withered him from the inside out. "Fix what?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "The marriage you dissolved in front of 45 people? The replacement wife you dressed in family jewelry while I was still seated at your table?" The room listened, rapt, as I rose from my chair slowly. "You didn't just file for divorce, Timothy. You performed it, like a stage play." Judith took another step back, her mask of grace replaced by a tight-lipped panic. "You said she couldn't have kids," she muttered, barely audible. Timothy's head snapped toward her, but he didn't respond. The statement hung in the air like fog, thick and damning. I didn't need to say anything. Judith's words had done the work for me. Sharon found her voice next, brittle and rushed. "We can undo this. You don't have to file the papers." Her eyes darted between me and Mason, looking for cues, looking for control. "Think of the child. Think of what's best for the baby." I stared at her, unblinking, the image of her smiling as I opened the divorce papers burned into my mind. "You mean the baby you said I'd never give you?" I asked. "The one you used as the reason to end my marriage?" Sharon flinched, her hand tightening on her wine glass. "This child doesn't need your kind of family," I continued. "And he'll never grow up thinking love comes with conditions and contracts." The shift was complete now. The power fully returned to me. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of people who had once whispered about my worth. They had cheered my downfall, but now they sat silent, witness to a redemption none of them deserved. I pushed back my chair, its legs scraping loudly against the hardwood. "I'm leaving," I said, the finality of the words ringing out like a bell. I moved toward the door with calm purpose, each step carving distance between me and the wreckage of my marriage. Erica walked beside me, her presence as steady as it had been the moment she stood up for me. Behind us, chairs scraped and voices rose in broken pleas, but I didn't look back. Timothy called out again, something desperate and breathless, but I let it fall away like a leaf on the wind. That house was no longer mine, and neither was the man I had once called husband. Mason's voice cracked behind us, thick with urgency. "Catherine, please. You can't take our grandchild away from us." His words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I stopped only once, pausing in the doorway as guests murmured behind their half-full glasses. Turning back, I met his eyes without flinching. "I'm not taking your grandchild," I said, my voice clear and sharp. "You gave him away the moment you handed me those divorce papers." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, like the final nail in a coffin. Sharon's mouth opened to respond, but no sound came out. She looked at me as though realizing too late that she had backed the wrong future. We stepped out into the night, the air crisp and alive compared to the stifling atmosphere inside. Porch lights from neighboring houses glowed softly, unaware of the chaos behind us. Erica opened the car door, and I slid into the passenger seat, suddenly overwhelmed by the urge to sob. I didn't, though. Not yet. There would be time for grief later. As we pulled away, the house disappeared behind hedges and streetlights, taking with it the expectations that had nearly broken me. Erica said nothing at first, her hands steady on the wheel, her gaze fixed ahead. The silence between us was gentle, not tense, a space that welcomed breath. "You did the right thing," she said finally, voice low but firm. "I've never been prouder of you in my life." I swallowed hard, the tightness in my chest loosening with each passing block. "I feel like I'm floating outside my body," I confessed. "Like this happened to someone else, and I'm just watching." Erica nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "That's trauma," she replied, squeezing my hand as we stopped at a red light. When we arrived at my house, it looked different, smaller somehow, and yet more like home than it ever had before. I unlocked the door with trembling fingers, stepping into a space I had once shared but no longer needed to justify. The scent of lavender and lemon lingered from the diffuser I had placed that morning, trying to set the mood for an anniversary that had turned into a funeral. Erica followed quietly, waiting for me to signal what came next. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and exhaled slowly, the weight of the evening catching up all at once. "I need tea," I murmured, almost dazed. Erica moved instantly, putting on the kettle as though it were second nature. The familiarity of her actions grounded me, a rhythm I didn't realize I needed. I sat at the breakfast nook, tracing the grain of the wood table with my fingertips. Everything in the house seemed sharper, clearer, like I was seeing it through newly focused eyes. The tea was warm in my hands, the steam curling up like whispered comfort. "Thank you," I said, and meant it in ways that went beyond the hot mug. Erica smiled gently, her eyes glassy but proud. "You don't owe them anything, Catherine. Not your child, not your name, and definitely not your forgiveness." We sat in silence, the soft ticking of the wall clock filling the space between sips. At some point, I changed into pajamas, folded carefully from the drawer I had organized earlier that week. The familiar cotton hugged my skin like armor. I pulled a blanket over my legs and finally let the tears fall, not the frantic sobs of before, but slow, heavy tears that acknowledged the death of what I thought was real. My mother's voice echoed in my mind from the last conversation we'd had before tonight. She'd known something was wrong, sensed it in the pauses and strained tones of our calls. I hadn't told her everything, not yet, but that time was coming. Erica rested her head against the back of the couch, keeping quiet while I cried beside her. She knew grief didn't need fixing, it just needed space. Eventually, I reached for my phone and dialed the number I knew by heart. It was nearly midnight, but she answered on the second ring, worry crackling through the line. "Catherine, sweetheart, is everything okay?" I choked out a laugh that turned into a sob. "Mom, I'm getting a divorce, and I'm pregnant." There was a pause, and then only warmth. "Come home," she said, no hesitation in her voice. "You and the baby can stay here as long as you need. We'll take care of everything." Her certainty undid me in the best way. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to make a plan for me until she did. "Thank you," I whispered, pressing the phone to my cheek like it could transfer her comfort directly into my skin. Erica listened silently as I repeated the conversation, nodding when I mentioned the invitation. "I'll help you pack tomorrow," she said. "Let's get you out of here before anyone else tries to control your story." I nodded, already beginning to feel the pull of something like hope. That night, I slept in my own bed, alone for the first time in a year. But the sheets didn't feel cold. They felt like mine again. I lay on my side, one hand resting on my abdomen, thinking about the child growing inside me. The one they said I'd never have. The one they discarded without even asking. By morning, the ache hadn't vanished, but it had dulled enough to let me move. Erica arrived early, coffee in one hand and pastries in the other. "Fuel first, then freedom," she declared, setting the bags on the counter. We worked methodically, packing only what I needed, only what felt like mine. Anything that smelled like Timothy's family stayed behind. By noon, the car was full and my house was locked. I took one last look at the porch, the door, the carefully trimmed lawn I had once imagined children running across. That future was gone, but something better waited. Erica hugged me tightly, her eyes shimmering with pride and sorrow. "Call me as soon as you get there, okay?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you for everything," I said again. "For not letting me sign those papers without knowing." She smiled, brushing hair from my face like a sister would. "I just reminded you of who you are. The rest was all you." The drive to my mother's house was longer than usual, not in distance but in emotional weight. Every familiar turn of the road felt like another layer of my old life peeling away behind me. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting over my stomach, protective without thinking. The hum of the car and the quiet countryside became my temporary refuge, the rhythm calming the thoughts that swirled in my head. I didn't cry on the drive. I had already run out of tears. Mom was waiting on the porch when I pulled into the driveway, wrapped in her favorite gray shawl despite the morning sun. She didn't say anything right away, just came down the steps and wrapped me in her arms. Her hug didn't ask questions, didn't need explanations. It just held. I let myself sink into her warmth for a moment longer than usual, grateful for love that asked for nothing in return. "Come inside, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're home now." The inside of the house smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry, grounding me with childhood memories I hadn't revisited in years. I set my bag by the door and sat on the same floral couch where I'd once watched cartoons after school. Mom brought me tea without asking what I wanted, placing it on the coffee table with a small plate of shortbread cookies. "You don't need to talk until you're ready," she said, sitting beside me and folding her hands in her lap. "But whenever you are, I'm here." I nodded, tears rising again but not spilling over. "It was so cruel, Mom," I whispered. "They handed me divorce papers like it was a toast." My fingers tightened around the warm mug as I stared at the steam curling above it. "They introduced his fiancée in front of everyone, at our anniversary dinner, as if I were an obstacle, not a person." Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing with restrained fury. "I always had a bad feeling about that family," she said, voice clipped but calm. "But I never imagined they would go that far." Her hand found mine, squeezing gently. "You didn't deserve any of it. Not the judgment, not the silence, and certainly not the betrayal." I kept trying to make them love me, I admitted, ashamed of how hard I'd worked for approval that would never come. Every dinner, every holiday, every forced conversation, I thought if I just tried harder, it would get better. The shame felt corrosive, like rust eating through old metal. But I wasn't a person to them. I was a box on a family checklist that never got ticked. She nodded slowly, brushing a strand of hair from my face like she used to when I was sick. "There are people who love conditionally, Catherine, who assign value based on what you can give them." Her voice was low, steady, like a river smoothing stone. "But that's not love, that's convenience in disguise." The rest of that day passed in a blur of unpacking and resting. Mom made a simple lunch and insisted I nap while she set up the guest room. I didn't argue because for the first time in weeks, I felt safe enough to sleep. I lay on the soft mattress under an old quilt she had sewn years ago, the scent of lavender sachets tucked into the pillowcases calming my breath. When I woke hours later, the sun was setting, and something inside me felt slightly repaired. Over dinner, I asked if she'd come with me to my next appointment with Dr. Patterson. "Of course," she said without hesitation. "We'll go together. You won't have to go through anything alone again." Her certainty made something inside me ache and heal all at once. The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday, a routine checkup now layered with more emotional significance than before. I dressed in a soft sweater and jeans, keeping my outfit simple and comfortable. Mom waited in the reception area while I was called in, her knitting needles clicking quietly as I disappeared behind the door. Dr. Patterson greeted me with her usual calm professionalism. her kind eyes scanning the chart before meeting mine. "You've had a tough couple of weeks, I imagine," she said. I nodded, too tired to laugh at the understatement. "You could say that." She began the exam, guiding the process with gentle explanations and warm hands. "The baby's heartbeat is strong," she said, as the monitor filled the room with the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of new life. I hadn't heard it before, and the sound caught me off guard. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. Dr. Patterson placed a tissue in my hand without comment, giving me a moment. "It's a good heartbeat," she said softly. "Healthy, steady, just like we want." I nodded, holding the tissue tightly as the room spun with meaning. "Thank you," I whispered. Back in the waiting room, Mom looked up from her knitting, concern flickering in her eyes. I smiled through my tears and nodded. "Heartbeat's strong," I said, and she exhaled in visible relief. We walked out of the clinic together under a clear blue sky, the moment beginning to settle into something like hope. Life was moving forward, no matter how broken it had felt just days before. In the weeks that followed, small routines began to take shape. Mom and I walked every morning around the neighborhood, her arm linked with mine as we passed houses I'd grown up waving to. We cooked simple meals together, read in the quiet afternoons, and talked more than we had in years. She asked about names and nursery colors with a gentleness that never pushed too far. I began to imagine what life could look like if I stopped trying to prove myself to the wrong people. Erica called every few days, her voice always a balm of wit and unwavering support. "You should see Judith's face when people ask if you're okay," she told me one evening. It's like she thought getting engaged to a married man would come with confetti and applause. I laughed genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Karma's not subtle," she added. "It's just patient." I still hadn't heard from Timothy, and part of me was grateful for the silence. Whatever realizations he was having now, they were his to sit with. The legal proceedings moved forward with little resistance, thanks to the public nature of our split and the clarity of the documents. My lawyer, a woman recommended by Erica's firm, was both fierce and compassionate. "They expected you to walk away quietly," she said during one call. "I'm glad you didn't." As the first trimester ended, Dr. Patterson confirmed everything was progressing well. I placed the ultrasound image on the fridge, a small, grainy symbol of strength. My body, the one they had labeled broken, was nurturing a life against all odds. Mom caught me staring at the picture one afternoon and smiled. "That baby's gonna know what unconditional love really feels like." By the start of my second trimester, the worst of the morning sickness had passed, and my appetite began to return. Mom noticed first, commenting on how I finally cleared an entire plate of her chicken pot pie without pausing halfway through. "Baby must like it," she said with a wink, and for once I smiled without forcing it. Food started tasting like comfort again instead of obligation. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a burden in someone else's kitchen. Erica drove up for the weekend, arms full of maternity clothes and gossip from back home. "I raided my sister's storage bins," she announced proudly. "Turns out she hoards baby gear like it's currency." We spent the afternoon trying on stretchy dresses and laughing over how strange my body looked in them. My stomach, once a source of shame under Sharon's scrutiny, now felt like a soft badge of defiance. Over coffee the next morning, Erica leaned in with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You'll never guess who tried to bump into me at the farmer's market." I raised an eyebrow, already suspecting. "Timothy," she confirmed, rolling her eyes. "Full suit on a Saturday, pretending to examine carrots like they held the meaning of life." I snorted into my mug, amused despite myself. "Did he say anything?" Erica nodded, taking a slow sip of her drink. "He asked if I'd heard from you, said he regretted how things played out." She set the cup down, expression tightening. "I told him you were healthy, happy, and thriving, then suggested he focus on planning Judith's bridal shower instead." The news left me with an odd sense of satisfaction, not quite joy, but something like closure. I didn't want him back. There was no part of me that missed what he had become. But knowing he was haunted by what he lost felt just. "He made his choice," I said, my voice calm. "Now he has to live with it." That Sunday, Mom and Erica helped me sort through baby name books, each page a portal into the unknown. We circled favorites in pencil, made notes in the margins, and debated initials like they held prophecy. David, I said softly at one point, the name warming my tongue. David Miller. Erica looked up from her book and nodded slowly. That's a good name. Solid. Strong. Yours. We never discussed Timothy's last name again. It had become irrelevant. This child would carry mine, not out of defiance, but as a declaration of independence. I wasn't raising someone else's heir. I was raising my son. My family would not be defined by patriarchal bloodlines or generational control. We would be defined by choice, strength, and the refusal to accept cruelty as a condition for love. By the time spring thawed the last patches of snow on the sidewalk, my world had taken on a new rhythm. Mornings were slow and sweet, filled with the aroma of fresh tea and newspaper crosswords Mom insisted we solve together. Afternoons were for walks and doctor appointments, for nursery planning and quiet moments of reflection. Nights were peaceful, my sleep deeper now that my heart didn't brace itself for betrayal. Even in my solitude, I felt surrounded by more love than I ever had in my marriage. One rainy Wednesday, I received a letter, not a text, not an email, but a handwritten letter with Timothy's return address scrawled across the back. I stared at it for hours before opening it, unsure if I even wanted his words in my space. But curiosity, or maybe a need for full closure, finally won out. Inside, his handwriting was rushed and uneven, like he'd written it in one sitting without pause. The first line read, "Catherine, I made the biggest mistake of my life." I read the rest without emotion, letting the words wash over me like water on glass. He apologized for his silence, for the party, for the betrayal that still echoed in my bones. He wrote that Judith had called off the engagement after realizing she'd been more of a pawn than a partner. He claimed Mason and Sharon were ashamed, though I didn't believe it for a second. And at the end, he asked if there was a chance he could be part of the baby's life. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because some silences speak louder than any reply. He had orchestrated my erasure and was only now recognizing the permanence of what he lost. My son would not grow up used as leverage or legacy. He would grow up in truth, surrounded by people who had never once asked me to be someone else. And that truth would be my greatest gift to him. The baby shower was held in early summer, hosted by Erica and attended by women who had loved me through the hardest chapter of my life. The house was filled with laughter, soft pastels, and the clink of teacups. Guests brought thoughtful gifts and warm stories, and every word felt like balm. There were no veiled comments, no comparisons, no expectations I hadn't chosen. Just love, celebration, and a promise that this child would be welcomed for who he was, not what he could prove. My mother stood beside me as I opened each present, her eyes glistening with pride. "You've built something beautiful here," she whispered, holding my hand between gifts. "And you've done it with grace, even when they tried to break you." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I just wanted to be enough," I said, and she squeezed my fingers. "You were always enough," she replied. They were the ones who weren't. That night, after the guests had gone and the leftover cake had been packed into Tupperware, I sat in the nursery alone. The walls were painted soft sage green, the crib assembled and waiting, the shelves lined with books that once belonged to me. I placed a framed ultrasound next to the lamp and whispered to my son, "You are already so loved." In the final weeks of pregnancy, the pace of life slowed. Each day became about preparation. Hospital bags packed, car seat installed, frozen meals made. But beneath the logistics was a quiet current of excitement, a hope that pulsed through everything. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of motherhood, not of raising a child alone, and certainly not of letting go of what had never been real. I had let go of shame, of grief, of the idea that worth had to be earned. And in their place, I found joy. Not the flashy kind made for photos or applause, but the steady, nourishing kind that built a home inside me. The kind that made me reach out to touch my growing belly and smile without needing anyone's permission. The kind that reminded me daily, I was not broken. I was beginning. Labor began early one Tuesday morning. marked first by a deep ache in my lower back that refused to go away. I tried to ignore it at first, brushing it off as another pregnancy discomfort. But by midday, the contractions had become regular and sharp. Mom noticed the shift in my breathing and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's time," she said with quiet certainty. We gathered the hospital bag, called Erica, and drove through the city with an anticipation that tingled in my fingertips. The delivery room was bright and calm, with soft beeping machines and nurses who moved with practiced grace. Erica arrived minutes after we were admitted, her expression equal parts excitement and steel. She stood on one side of me, Mom on the other, forming a circle of support stronger than any blood tie. My body trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of transition, of everything that had led to this exact moment. "You're doing beautifully," Dr. Patterson encouraged, her voice a steady anchor through the waves of pain. Hours passed in a blur of breathing, pushing, and whispered encouragement. I focused on Erica's voice counting for me, on my mother's cool hands pressing a cloth to my forehead. When the final moment came, it was both terrifying and transcendent, a collision of exhaustion and awe. The cry filled the room like a bell ringing through a storm. And just like that, he was here. They laid him on my chest, skin against skin, and my whole world contracted into that tiny, perfect face. His cries quieted the moment I touched him, as if he knew me already. I ran my fingers over his soft head, memorizing every wrinkle, every sound, every breath. "Hello, David," I whispered through tears. "Welcome home." Mom cried openly, her hand over her mouth, while Erica leaned her head against mine and laughed through her own tears. "He's perfect," she said, voice cracking. "Absolutely perfect." I looked at my son and knew she was right. Every betrayal, every tear, every humiliating moment, they had all led here, and none of them mattered anymore. We spent 2 nights in the hospital, wrapped in a cocoon of nurses, soft lighting, and late-night lullabies. David was healthy and strong, passing every check with the quiet resilience I'd already come to admire. I stayed awake for hours just watching him sleep, tracing the shape of his nose and wondering which parts of him came from me. I didn't think about Timothy, and I didn't speak his name. He had no place in this story anymore. Back home, the nursery I had carefully built came alive with new sounds. Tiny cries, soft music, whispered lullabies. Mom helped with midnight feedings while Erica organized meal deliveries from her office. We fell into rhythm, the 3 of us rotating seamlessly through baby baths, diaper changes, and endless laundry. Love filled every corner of the house in a way it never had before. David had turned a refuge into a home. 1 week later, a letter arrived postmarked from Mason and Sharon's estate. It was addressed to me in Mason's handwriting, rigid and slanted as though written with trembling fingers. I held it for a full minute before opening it, unsure if it would be an apology or another performance. Inside was a single sheet of cream stationery and a photograph of Timothy holding a framed ultrasound picture. The letter was brief. "Catherine," it began, "we were wrong." It went on to acknowledge the cruelty of what they had done, framed mostly as a lapse in judgment rather than a confession of character. "We hope someday you'll allow David to know his paternal grandparents." They included no phone number, only a mailing address and an invitation to reply. I folded the letter in half and placed it at the bottom of David's keepsake box, where it would stay unread by him until he was old enough to decide for himself. Erica's reaction was swift and fierce when I told her. "They don't get to rewrite their part just because the ending wasn't what they expected," she said. "You owe them nothing." Her loyalty was still the shield I didn't know I needed. I agreed, but a part of me, deep, cautious, was grateful for their silence since that night. The letter, at least, marked an acknowledgement that they'd lost something irreplaceable. The months passed quickly, each day adding new details to the story I was building with my son. He learned to smile first, then laugh, his giggles breaking through the quiet mornings like sunlight through blinds. His first tooth arrived on a rainy Tuesday, and I called Mom into the room with such excitement you'd think I had discovered gold. I recorded every milestone in a journal Erica had given me, one labeled Proof of Love. I didn't miss the life I'd left behind. I missed nothing at all. On David's first birthday, we threw a small party in the backyard. Just family and friends who had stood beside me when it mattered most. There were balloons in soft blues and whites, a carrot cake my mom baked with David's name in tiny icing letters, and a single candle he tried to grab instead of blow out. He waddled from person to person, smiling shyly and clinging to my skirt with sticky hands. We took a photo together, me, Erica, and Mom, each of us holding part of David as he laughed. I framed it later that night and placed it next to my bed. In the quiet after the party, once the plates were cleaned and guests had gone, I stood barefoot on the porch watching the sky darken. Erica stepped beside me, handing me a mug of tea. "You know," she said, "this is the life they tried to convince you you'd never have." I nodded, sipping slowly, and it's better than anything they could have imagined. That night I sat in David's nursery long after he'd fallen asleep, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest. The mobile spun above him, casting gentle shadows across the wall. I thought about legacy, not the kind Mason talked about with wine in his hand and disdain in his voice, but the kind you build through kindness, through truth. My son would never have to earn love like a prize. He would never question his worth in someone else's home. That was the legacy I was creating. I never sent a reply to Mason's letter, never reached out to Timothy or Judith. My silence was my boundary, my answer, my final word. They had made their choices and received their outcomes. I had made mine and built a life they would never touch. I didn't need revenge or recognition. I had David, and he was enough. David began speaking early, forming small, deliberate words, with the seriousness of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. Mama came first, followed quickly by Nana, which made my mother weep softly into her apron the first time he said it. Eka became Erica, his honorary aunt, who responded each time like he'd gifted her a crown. He was expressive, curious, and so full of joy that even strangers in the grocery store paused to comment on his laughter. Watching him grow was like watching sunlight fill every corner of a room I never knew had been dark. I returned to work part-time when David turned 18 months, picking up freelance design projects from a few former clients. It was flexible, manageable, and gave me something beyond diapers and snack schedules to focus on. My mother handled the mornings, walking David around the neighborhood and reading to him from his growing library. In the afternoons, I took him to the park where he gravitated toward the sandbox and made fast friends with a black Labrador named Charlie. Doggy. He would shriek with unfiltered glee, and the dog's tail would wag like it had waited all day just for him. Charlie's owner, a woman named Clara, struck up conversation with me over juice boxes and scattered toys. She was a single mother too, raising twin girls with a mixture of humor and hard-earned wisdom. We shared stories about sleepless nights and picky eating, about the unspoken solidarity among women rebuilding lives from ashes. Clara's friendship was easy and organic, born of shared routines and sincere empathy. By the end of that summer, we were taking turns hosting playdates and swapping dinner leftovers in mismatched containers. One afternoon while David napped, I found myself scrolling through my phone, not looking for anything in particular. The search bar autofilled Timothy's name before I could stop it, a habit I hadn't indulged in over a year. His profile was private now, the only visible photo a professional headshot taken for some consulting business. No Judith, no child, no wedding photos. Just carefully curated distance and a life that seemed quieter than the one he'd so eagerly leapt into. I didn't feel the urge to message him or even linger on the screen. There was no more anger, no bitterness, just distance, wide and irreversible. I had lived through a moment that had once defined me, but now it was just a memory filed away. Erica had once told me healing wasn't forgetting, it was remembering without reopening the wound, and that's exactly what I felt now, peace with boundaries still intact. On David's second birthday, we had a picnic in the same park where he'd first played in the sandbox. Clara brought the twins, and a homemade chocolate cake that leaned just slightly to the left. Erica arrived with balloons and a tiny basketball jersey with Miller stitched on the back. My mother made sandwiches wrapped in wax paper like she used to for my childhood field trips. The air was filled with laughter, dogs barking, and the kind of joy that comes from rebuilding a life on your own terms. After the cake was cut and sticky fingers wiped clean, I sat on the picnic blanket with Erica while David chased bubbles across the grass. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked carefully, her gaze on the horizon. I didn't need to ask which night. There was only one that still echoed in our history like a cracked bell. "Not like I used to," I replied. "It used to be the defining chapter. Now it's just the prologue." Erica smiled, her expression soft. "You rewrote the story, and Catherine, it's better than anything they could have written for you." I let her words settle into me, warm and affirming. "I didn't know I could," I admitted, voice quiet. "But David, he gave me the reason to try." Later that evening, after the gifts were opened and guests had gone, I sat with my mother on the porch. David was asleep in her arms, his tiny hand curled around the edge of her cardigan. We watched the stars come out, one by one, each a quiet reminder of the vastness of time and change. "He'll never know how hard you fought for this peace," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And that's the gift. You've made it look effortless." "I just didn't want him to grow up feeling like he had to earn love," I whispered, "like I did." She didn't respond with words, just squeezed my hand and let the silence speak for her. In that moment, surrounded by the chirp of crickets and the soft creak of the porch swing, I understood the full scope of what we had built. It was fragile once, but now it was unshakable. Months passed, and David continued to thrive. He started preschool at 3, his backpack half his size, and his excitement unmatched. I stood outside the classroom window longer than I should have that first day, watching him settle at a table with crayons and unfiltered curiosity. When he looked up and waved at me, I waved back, the lump in my throat equal parts pride and disbelief. I had made it through the worst and into the ordinary, exactly where I had always wanted to be. Clara's twins were in the same class, which made morning drop-offs feel less lonely. We'd walk to the coffee shop afterward, pushing strollers and sharing stories about job interviews and mismatched socks. One morning, she told me about a parenting workshop at the community center, and I signed up without hesitation. It was just another step in this life I had once thought would never exist, a life that felt less like survival and more like a quiet, persistent bloom. At the end of the workshop, a speaker asked us to write letters to our children, to be opened on their 18th birthdays. I went home that night and sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, staring at the blank page for a long time. Then I began. "Dear David, you were born the night everything changed." I wrote about the night I signed my name to divorce papers and the day I heard his heartbeat. I told him the truth, not every detail, but enough to understand that he had been my turning point. "You were the moment I remembered who I was," I wrote, blinking back tears. "And because of you, I never forgot again." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box I would fill over the years. Photos, notes, first drawings. The physical record of a love that had never been conditional. The archive of a life reclaimed. David was 4 the first time he asked why he didn't have a dad like some of the other kids. We were walking home from preschool, leaves crunching under our feet, when he looked up at me with those wide, curious eyes. "My friend said his dad picks him up sometimes," he said softly. "Where's mine?" I stopped walking, crouched down, and met his gaze. "You and I have our own story, sweetheart," I said gently. "And when you're older, I'll tell you everything." He accepted that answer with a quiet nod, slipping his hand back into mine as we continued down the sidewalk. I knew the day would come when the explanation needed more depth, but for now, love and honesty in small doses would be enough. I spent that evening flipping through old journals, tracing the arc of our life from survival to thriving. Each page reminded me of how far we'd come and how much he had saved me just by existing. He wasn't born into perfection, but he was raised in truth. The following week, I received an invitation to my cousin Julia's wedding, a formal affair hosted at a vineyard 2 towns over. My mother encouraged me to attend, offering to watch David for the weekend. "It might be good for you," she said, pressing a hand to my back. "You deserve to show up in the world again, not as someone's ex-wife, but as yourself." I hesitated, remembering how weddings used to make me feel like a failure, but eventually I agreed. I hadn't worn a dress like that in years, deep navy, off-shoulder, with a silhouette that made me feel like someone I used to know. Clara helped me pick it out, fussing over the hem, while Erica sent approving texts from 3 states away. As I stood in the mirror the morning of the wedding, I barely recognized the woman looking back. She wasn't haunted anymore. She looked steady, composed, and quietly radiant. At the reception, surrounded by music and wine and clinking glasses, I let myself relax into the rhythm of celebration. I chatted with cousins I hadn't seen since before my marriage, people who remembered me before all the chaos. None of them brought up Timothy, and if they remembered what had happened, they were kind enough to leave it in the past. I danced a little, laughed a lot, and when someone asked if I was seeing anyone, I said no, but I'm in love with my life. And for the first time ever, I meant it. Late into the evening, I stepped outside for air and stood under the canopy of string lights that glowed like suspended stars. The vineyard was quiet except for the faint sound of crickets and distant laughter spilling from the tent. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of lavender and grapevines. The memory of Mason's dining room flickered through my mind, not as pain, but as contrast. That chapter had ended, and this was the one I'd written in its place. Back home the next day, David ran to me with arms wide, yelling, "Mama!" as though I'd been gone a year. I scooped him up, burying my face in his hair, grateful for the weight of him in my arms. "Did you miss me?" I asked, and he nodded against my shoulder. "Nana says you were at a party," he whispered. "Next time, can I come too?" We settled back into routine easily, the brief escape only reminding me of how much I loved the life we'd built. David started taking an interest in drawing, filling pages with stick figures and imaginary creatures he named with great seriousness. One night, he drew a picture of our family, me, him, Nana, and Erica, all holding hands in front of a yellow house. "That's us," he explained proudly, "and that's our dog, Charlie." I laughed, reminded that he still believed Clara's Labrador was partly ours. By the time David turned 5, I had filed the final paperwork to legally change his last name to mine. It was a symbolic step, but it felt like cement under the foundation we had built together. There was no protest from Timothy, no message, no interference. It was as if he had faded entirely from the path of our lives, and that absence was a gift I never took for granted. My son's name now matched the life he was living, one rooted in love, not legacy. Erica visited that summer, bringing her new boyfriend, Marcus, a quiet man with a kind smile and an easy laugh. David adored him instantly, following him around the backyard with endless questions and superhero trivia. "He's good with kids," Erica whispered to me one night while we sipped wine on the porch. I wasn't planning on introducing him to David yet, but it felt right. I nodded, grateful that the people in our lives made space for love that was real and unforced. That same week, I received a call from Dr. Patterson's office, asking if I would speak at a panel on postpartum recovery. I hesitated at first, unsure if I could speak those truths in public, but eventually said yes. The event was small, hosted at the community center, with women from all walks of life sharing their journeys. When it was my turn, I told my story, not as a victim, but as someone who had rebuilt her life one brick at a time. The applause afterward was quiet, respectful, and deeply healing. Later, a woman approached me, her hands trembling slightly as she held her purse. "I think I'm where you were," she said. "The early part, the part where it still hurts to breathe." I hugged her tightly, no words necessary, just a silent promise that she would make it through. Erica waited by the door with a knowing look, pride shining in her eyes. That night, I realized my story was no longer just mine. It was a torch passed to others in the dark. In the fall, David started kindergarten, his backpack full of sharpened pencils and hopes I'd packed alongside his lunch. I cried in the car after drop-off, overwhelmed not by sadness, but by the fullness of the life I never thought I'd have. Mom took me out for breakfast afterward, just the two of us, a rare, quiet moment. "You're doing such a good job," she said, slicing into her pancakes. "I hope you know that." I smiled, wiping my eyes. I didn't always believe I could. She reached across the table and took my hand. "That's the thing about belief, sweetheart. It doesn't have to start with you. It can start with someone else until you're ready to carry it yourself." Winter settled in with quiet determination, blanketing our little world in white and slowing the pace of everything around us. David took to it with enthusiasm, dragging his boots across the snow and building lopsided snowmen in the front yard. He named one Mr. Buttons and insisted we give it a scarf from the hall closet. I stood at the window with a mug of cocoa, watching him laugh in the cold, my heart aching with the kind of love that felt too big for words. Every giggle, every stomp, every frostbitten nose reminded me that we were alive in a story I once feared would never begin. Inside, we made paper snowflakes and decorated the mantel with cutouts shaped like stars and hearts. Mom taught David how to bake sugar cookies, letting him press cookie cutters into the dough with flour-dusted hands. He brought one to Erica when she visited and proclaimed it perfectly frosted even though the icing dripped down the sides. "Best cookie I've ever had," Erica said with her mouth full, grinning at him. Moments like that became the glue of our days. Uncomplicated, beautiful, and real. In early January, I got an email from Timothy's lawyer, formal, brief, and unexpected. He was requesting visitation rights, though he had never once tried to meet David since the night of the anniversary dinner. I sat in silence for a full minute, reading the message twice to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. After all this time, after years of absence, he wanted to appear as if he had been part of our story. I forwarded the email to my attorney with no response, then closed my laptop with trembling hands. I didn't tell David, not yet, not when nothing had been decided and nothing had been earned. My lawyer called the next morning, voice calm and professional as always. "We can fight this, Catherine," she said. "Based on abandonment, the optics are in your favor, but you need to decide what's best for your son, not just what feels just." I stared out the window, watching David build a snow fort as Charlie barked nearby, loyalty wrapped in fur. That night, after David was asleep, I curled up on the couch and let my thoughts unravel. I thought about the day I had signed those divorce papers and the sound of Mason's voice declaring me unfit for their legacy. I thought about the envelope Erica had handed over, the pregnancy test that changed everything, and the silence that followed. Timothy had left not only me, but his own child, before he ever got to know the boy he had helped create, and now he wanted to return as though absence didn't have weight, as though love could be summoned by paper and timing. Erica came over the next day, her arms full of groceries and eyes sharp with curiosity. I handed her the printed email, and she read it in complete silence. When she looked up, her jaw was tight, her voice low. "No, he doesn't get to pretend now. He gave up that right when he let Mason humiliate you in front of the people who were supposed to love you." I nodded, feeling the echo of her outrage vibrate in my own chest. "I don't want David growing up thinking someone can disappear and reappear when it suits them," I said. "He deserves better than uncertainty wrapped in a last name." Erica placed her hand over mine, grounding me the way she always had. "Then let's protect what you've built." My attorney filed a formal response 2 days later, citing abandonment and lack of consistent contact. We included statements from Dr. Patterson and my mother, as well as dated records showing the absence of child support or any gestures of involvement. It wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting stability. David's world was whole, even without a father in it. I wasn't going to let someone reintroduce chaos disguised as obligation. Weeks passed with no reply from Timothy's side, and I took that silence as an answer. Whether he had been pressured by guilt, loneliness, or outside influence, the effort had withered in the face of reality. David's life moved forward without interruption, his days filled with sled rides, art projects, and bedtime stories read aloud in silly voices. He never asked again about having a father, and I never filled the silence with false promises. Some questions didn't need immediate answers. They just needed love strong enough to hold them until the child was ready. In the spring, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership retreat hosted at a local arts center. The theme was turning points, and I was asked to share the story of how I rebuilt my life after public betrayal. I hesitated at first, unsure if reopening old wounds would serve any purpose. But then I remembered the woman from the community center, the one who said it still hurt to breathe. I thought of her, and I said yes. I stood before a room of women, some young, some older, some with wedding bands, some with tears already gathering in their eyes. I told them about the party, about the box with divorce papers, and about the woman named Judith standing in my place. I told them about signing the papers with my hand trembling and my heart breaking. Then I told them about the envelope. Erica slid across the table and the words that changed everything. "Catherine is pregnant." I described the silence that followed. And the child who became my reason to reclaim everything I thought I had lost. I told them how healing didn't happen in grand gestures, but in small acts. Making tea, unpacking boxes, writing names on chalkboards. I spoke of my mother, who held me up without conditions, and Erica, who gave me back my voice. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then applause filled the air like thunder breaking through a storm. I left the stage lighter, knowing the story I once thought would break me was now someone else's roadmap. That night, I walked into David's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He stirred slightly, murmuring something about dragons and peanut butter sandwiches, and I laughed softly. I leaned down and kissed his forehead, whispering the same words I had whispered the day he was born. "You saved me." And I meant it, more now than ever before. Years passed, not all at once, but in soft, steady moments that accumulated like sunlight on windowsills. David turned 8, then 10, each birthday marked by laughter, chocolate cake, and stories about how strong he had always been. His questions about the past came gently, often when we were doing something mundane, driving home from school, folding laundry, watering plants. "You said we have our own story," he began one day. "Can I know more about it now?" I nodded, hands resting still on the steering wheel as we waited at a red light. "You were born on a night when everything I thought I knew changed," I said. "Some people didn't believe in us, didn't think we belonged together, but they were wrong." He looked at me with quiet understanding, no bitterness in his expression, just curiosity. "So it was you and me from the beginning?" "Yes," I answered. "And you had Nana and Aunt Erica too." His smile spread slowly, as though the truth settled into a place it had always been meant to land. He didn't ask for names or faces of those who left. He only wanted to understand what stayed. "I think that makes us the strongest kind of family," he said, and I nearly had to pull the car over to cry. David thrived in school, excelling in art and science, building things from scraps of cardboard that somehow held weight and balance. He joined a soccer team, quickly becoming the kid who passed more than he scored, always thinking about others first. Erica never missed a game, even when her new job in publishing had her traveling most weeks. She sent him soccer cleats from every city she visited, and he kept them lined up on his closet shelf like trophies. Mom, retired now, devoted herself entirely to being the grandmother she had once feared she'd never get to be. Our house, once a sanctuary built from heartbreak, became a hub of laughter, school projects, and sleepovers with friends. Charlie, now graying around the muzzle, still visited with Clara's family and claimed his place on our living room rug during movie nights. One evening, while David curled up beside him, he looked up and asked, "Why don't we ever talk to my dad?" I paused, breathing in before answering, not out of fear, but out of respect for the truth. "Because he chose not to be part of your life when it mattered most," I said carefully. David didn't flinch, didn't cry, just nodded slowly. "So he missed out," he said simply, "and I didn't." I wrapped my arm around his shoulders, marveling at the wisdom children carry when they've been loved, without interruption. "That's exactly right," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "You never missed anything. You've always had everything you needed. One summer afternoon, I found myself on the back porch reading a letter that had arrived in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. It was from Judith, not Timothy, not Mason or Sharon, but Judith, whose name I hadn't spoken aloud since the night she stood in my place at what should have been my table. Her words were tentative, almost apologetic, as she explained the unraveling of her own life after that evening. Quote, "I didn't understand the damage I was part of," she wrote, "but I see it now." She didn't ask for forgiveness, only said she hoped I had found happiness. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing to answer. Her remorse belonged to her, and my peace didn't require her validation. I folded the letter and placed it in a box marked Past, next to the one I'd sealed years ago with Mason's apology. Timothy never wrote again, never called, never reached for the life he'd thrown away. I sometimes wondered if he had built something new, something better, or if he lived with the echo of a name he no longer had the right to speak. But that wondering never turned into longing. I had long since stopped needing closure from people who had shown me who they were. Some ghosts don't haunt, they simply fade. David was 13 the first time he referred to Erica as Aunt E in front of his friends, casually, as if she had always been part of his biology. She laughed, ruffled his hair, and pulled him into a side hug that made his cheeks flush with pretend embarrassment. "You know you're my favorite nephew," she said, even though he was her only one. "And you're my favorite almost mom," he shot back with a grin. The bond they shared was something sacred, chosen, nurtured, and unshakable. At 15, David received his first school award for community leadership, and he insisted Mom and Erica attend the ceremony with me. When they called his name and he stepped on stage in his navy jacket and tie, I felt time bend slightly. I saw the boy who used to draw us holding hands in front of a yellow house, and I saw the man he was becoming, compassionate, steady, and unafraid of truth. "To my family," he said during his speech, "you taught me that love is louder than absence." Afterward, we went out for dinner, and David asked for a toast, holding up his glass of sparkling cider with the confidence of someone far older than his years. "Two beginnings that don't look like fairy tales," he said, "but end up better than anything you could have imagined." We clinked glasses and laughed, the candlelight catching in our eyes. That night, long after he had gone to bed, I opened the journal I'd kept since his birth and wrote one final entry. "He became the man I hoped for, and I became the woman I never thought I could be." On the day David moved into his college dorm, he turned to me before closing the door. "You know I'll call you, right?" he said. "Like every other day at least." I smiled, brushing a stray piece of lint from his jacket. "I know, sweetheart. Go write your story now. It's your turn." As I walked back to the car, the silence felt strange but not empty. I looked around at the other parents, at the other sons and daughters stepping into their futures. I had walked through fire for mine, through betrayal and silence and doubt, and still, here I was. My legacy wasn't about who left, it was about who stayed, who grew, who loved. And in the quiet, I felt nothing but gratitude. The life they tried to take from me became the life I gave to myself. It grew in gardens, in small triumphs, in laughter that echoed off kitchen walls and stories read aloud at bedtime. It thrived in resilience, in chosen family, in the son who knew exactly who he was because I had never let him believe he was less. I didn't get justice from the people who wronged me. I got something better. I got peace. Thank you for listening to Catherine's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.